please join me in providing a very warm welcome to Kelsey Hightower.
How y'all doing? They invited me to an Agile conference, and I was like, what? Kelsey and Agile? I don't know. My first experience with Agile was like a near-death experience. I was about 6 years into my IT career, and I finally got a job at one of those enterprise companies where you can only wear jeans on Friday. And they asked everyone to come to the center of this room, what are you doing? And everyone got into this circle, and they were giving status updates. And they did this every day, like clockwork. And I asked people, do you have a different status update than yesterday? They was like, no, just do it. Don't complain, and it'll be over in 5 minutes. And so now it's my turn to give my status update. And I'm standing there, and there's a lot of people in this circle. And it's taken a very long time, and I started to zone out. And I learned what happens when you zone out during the stand-up. I zoned out, and I lost track of time, and my teammates had to revive me. And so, quick on their feet, they put some headphones in my ear. And I came back. Turns out, if you don't pay attention to the stand-up, this guy will show up and make sure you never have a stand-up again. And so this Agile thing never sat well with me because I didn't understand the value of the process. It felt like we were just doing this process for the sake of process. And I gained this allergic reaction to any company that said, we do Agile here. Have you seen people that do Agile a little too hard? I remember being a VP of engineering, and I was looking for a sticky note just to make a note and put it on the side of my monitor. And we're out of sticky notes. I'm like, where are all the damn sticky notes? And I walked into one of the engineering planning sessions. I'm not allowed in there normally. I was just in there looking for sticky notes. And it turned out they had all of the sticky notes at the center of the table. And they were trying to decide about what to talk about. And so they passed out sticky notes to everyone, and they decided to write down what they thought was important, and then they would vote on what to talk about based on those sticky notes. 75% of the meeting is gone, and they finally voted on what to cover. And I'm like, maybe we could have spent this time talking about the things we are actually working on and what we can do to make them better. And I asked the team, is this process actually working for you? And the Agile coach stepped up. He's like, yeah, ever since we put this in place, everything's been great. And one of my engineers, sitting quietly in the corner, she spoke up and said, this process is doing nothing for the actual team. And I asked her to explain. And she says, every sprint we come in here and we guess about things we've never done before. I literally just make numbers up. How long do you think this will take? I don't know. What do you want to hear? And we write it down, and we take on all of this work, and we never finish it. And we go back in this room, and we do a retrospective, trying to guess why we can never finish the work that we've promised. How about we underestimate this time? Whatever we come up with, let's cut it in half, and then just deliver all of it, and if with our free time, we can write documentation and test. Let's just try it one time. That's what we did. We said a thing, we cut it in half, we delivered every time, and we spent the rest of the time doing all the stuff that never makes it into the sprint. Engineers got happy. And there's one other element, one serious trick to fixing any organization. Do you all know what that one trick is? Now, you all are an Agile group. That means you guys can execute probably pretty quickly and you understand process. I'm going to ask you to feel the thing that makes most organizations successful. You've already done it once or twice. I'm going to ask everyone to just get up and move one table over as quickly as you can. As quickly as you can in 30 seconds. Just move one table. Quickly as you can. Now that you got your seats, I know this can be a bit challenging. Wow, you all are fast. This is amazing. You have now just taken part of what they call the reorg. When everything else fails, just move people around. It buys you at least 18 months, guaranteed. But in seriousness, though, I started this program at Google called Empathetic Engineering. And before we get to that program, I, as an observer of being a part of this process, I've always asked myself, what is the point of Agile? And I went to my very first Agile conference last year. They asked me to give a keynote. And the thing I learned from sitting at the lunch tables is a communication tool. I like these one-word summaries. It's a communication tool. If I was working by myself and I knew what the requirements were, I would just write the code and be done with it. And I would just ship it. And if I were to throw that on something like GitHub, I can get a feedback loop from the users of that particular project. They would file issues, and I would prioritize them based on my bandwidth, and I would just keep shipping. The communication loop will be very tight. But imagine trying to do this in an organization that is mirroring most governments these days. You have hierarchies, you have people trying to get promoted, you have all of these counter forces working against you, and they all want status updates about something they don't understand, about something we've never done before. And so we add all of these layers and processes to match the complexity of that organization, all, in my opinion, to communicate. When is this thing going to be done? Who is doing it? Why didn't it get done? How much bandwidth do we have? And I think the process has gotten so involved that people have forgotten this part. You're literally trying to communicate. All of those charts and graphs, all those Kanban boards, what are you doing? You're communicating who's working on what and where we are. That's what you're doing. And so that means that process should be able to be manipulated based on the most effective way of communicating at that particular organization. That means your developers probably want to hear something slightly differently than the actual executives that are paying for this particular effort. I think these things are super important. And so what I realized as an engineer, you spend most of your career not necessarily coming up with the right solution, but convincing the rest of the organization that you're correct. You may be wrong from time to time, but this graphic that you're sitting here is like basically what enterprise IT has been like for me for the last 20 years. You have a solution, and you have to convince others that it's the correct solution. And so where does this agility come from? Everyone's like, agility is about this idea of speed to value. And I've been doing this a long time, and I visit all these companies, and they ain't moving very fast. So what's wrong? Is Agile even working? Or do we just have this very elaborate process that makes us feel good about doing the work that we do? And I think it should be challenged. Where does the agility come from? And at that same Agile conference, he said the way to think about it is if you're doing it well, the team moves with grace, very effortlessly. The process starts to fade to the background and no longer dominates the activities that people do. They just have the ability to actually execute. And then the hard problem becomes figuring out what to actually do. And so when people tell me, hey, Agile takes its origins from lean manufacturing, right? They talk about the Toyota story and all of these things. Have you ever seen Toyota? They have working factories. Their challenge is, what car should we build? And once they make that decision, they can spit out 1 million of them. Most companies are not software factories. Most don't even have CI/CD pipelines. Most don't have developers that actually have ever done the thing that they're asking them to do ever before. There is no factory. Have you ever come up with a plan and the team is trying to figure out how to even build the underlying architecture to support the application? That's a lack of a factory. So copying and pasting Toyota's culture without a factory is a recipe for disaster. And most people haven't taken the time to zoom out to understand that is your Achilles heel to your attempt at moving fast. You lack the underlying factory to do that kind of work. And until you realize that, you will just be going through the motions, and you can call it whatever you want, but you will not have that grace that people speak about. And so this is a picture from this movie, Hidden Figures. And the reason why I like this movie is probably one of the best IT movies ever. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. And the characters in this movie do a really good job of talking about the different aspects of getting things done. And I'm going to talk about empathy a little bit because I think this is the piece that's missing from a lot of these process-driven approaches in many ways that actually lack the human experience necessary to keep people motivated to perform at the top of their game. Just because you give people charts and diagrams and hold them to estimates isn't necessarily the greatest motivating factor in software development. It isn't. There are real people involved. One of those characters in the movie is Dorothy Vaughan. Now, Dorothy Vaughan's team was subject to be replaced by this IBM mainframe. How many of you work at companies that still have mainframes? Did they replace the people? No. People are still there. And so Dorothy thought about it and said, listen, you're not going to replace my team. I'm going to learn how to program it instead. So the process led them to say, hey, the IBM mainframe will be more efficient. That'll be the best way of doing it. But it actually takes a team to actually deal with that system. And so where do we account for this learning? And the one thing that I like about her character, we hear this thing about a 10x engineer. I've yet to meet very many, if ever. But if you ever wanted to know what a 10x engineer looks like, they look like this. This is the person who gains the skills and goes back and trains the entire team, and they all move forward together. So if you ever wanted to know what a 10x engineer looks like, look no further. Now, how do you engineer with empathy? When I go to the classic enterprise, how many people have heard those phrases, digital transformation? I still have no idea what people are transforming into. Caterpillar, butterfly. Easy. The typical enterprise, I haven't seen a lot of analog systems running around. Most of these systems are already digital. So the question is, what are they transforming into? How many people can explain what their company is transforming into? Most people cannot, but they just go along with it. We're transforming the business. Yes. I have no idea what that means, but I'm a part of it. And so the thing that they talk about transforming is what? Typically the software systems that they give to their customer. At the end of the day, this process is designed to help us build software for customers. As a practice in a software organization, that's what you're doing. You're trying to build software, okay? The challenge is, what software do you build? Now, when I visit companies, I say, Kelsey, you don't understand. We're a 100,000-year-old company, and we have code that looks like this. Now, someone in the audience is like, Fortran? Yes. It ain't coming back, but it's still here. So if you have code like this, how many people write code like this? There's a person like, it's me. You'll be employed forever. Don't worry. And so what this code does is it takes input, and it actually does what pretty much every application on earth does. Most companies think they're super special. And I show up and I say, I'm going to guess what type of software you write. Data comes in, you process it in the middle, and data comes back out. They're like, how'd you know? It's like everyone's software works that way. And so what this Fortran does is it takes input, it calculates momentum off of that hidden figures theme, trying to get a person to space and back again. They had to do momentum calculations. So imagine getting one of the women from that movie at your organization, and they just want to write code in the way that they want. Now you may say, hey, this isn't modern code, this is legacy. What a horrible thing to say to software that literally pays your paycheck. It's not legacy software, it's classic, right? This is the stuff that makes money. One day you will write new software that may be fortunate enough to do the same. So if you look at this Fortran code, very simple, takes input and it spits out output. I'm going to show you it working on my laptop. So we take input, and it's just a bunch of numbers. 40 times 223, there's this momentum calculation. You multiply those and you get mass times velocity equals momentum. And now, how would we make this work? So Dorothy shows up. It's like, Kelsey, I've been running this program for years. It's quite simple, by the way. I take the input and I pipe it to the compiled version of that Fortran program and outputs the calculations. It works 100% on my laptop. And you say, no, 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 no. This must be modernized. We can't be running Fortran in the cloud. We can't be piping things through standard in and standard out. We need to modernize it. And all these companies talk about modernization, and what do they end up doing? A bunch of HTTP web services on top of their existing data stack. That is literally most people's modernization. They may call it APIs. They may call it digital transformation, but I'm going to tell you the secret. They're just putting HTTP on top of existing data and serving it to people. And for some reason, this requires 1,000 people and years of planning to make happen. There is no agility in this. And multiply this by every company in the world attempting to do the same thing, but unable to explain it because they're lost in DevOps, digital transformation, DevSecOps. No HTTP service on top of existing data. And we write this stuff over and over again. It isn't graceful. Now, what would it take to modernize this piece of software? Right? You could go and get some requirements. You could talk about the HTTP methods and paths and APIs and all of these things. Or we're moving into a world where a lot of the knowledge that we've gained in the last couple of decades has been generalized. Not into just docs with best practices, but into code generation tools. If you haven't tried some of the new software or tools for writing software, you can literally tell them what you want, and they do a very good approximation of generating the code to satisfy the needs. What would that look like in practice? Okay? So I would look at this code and say, look, all I need to do is wrap HTTP around it. There's no need to do this over and over again. Maybe we should have tooling that makes this better. To me, this is where the agility comes from. It's the ability to reuse the components that we've learned as an industry versus having us do this stand-up and richer roar over and over again. Has to be a better way. So I look at this as an empathetic engineer and say, you know what, let's keep the Fortran. Nothing wrong with it. At the core, it's usable. And we'll wrap HTTP around it and make it work. So we need to generate some code. So I like little tools to make life easier for the people I work with. So I built a tool called Diana. What Diana does is it reads in the core of your code and it wraps HTTP around it. Turns out you can generalize this problem. And so I take Diana. It's a very simple command line tool, nothing fancy. And basically you tell it where the code is. Here it's going to be in this current directory. And I'm going to run Diana, and the idea is that it will spit out a web service for me. And so if you ask me to estimate how long it would take to modernize this app, I'll be like, 3 minutes. And during the sprint planning, you'd be like, no way, it's 3 minutes. We don't have a card for 3 minutes. It's like, I know. Trust me, it will be fast, I hope. So we run Diana, and let's see what it does. Y'all don't have music for your command line tools? It makes it so much more fun working on this stuff. And so if Diana was working, we inspect the code, and we generate an HTTP service around it. And we can incorporate all of the things we've learned in all the previous sprints into the code generator. All the things around security, all the things you would find on a checklist. To me, automation should be the serialization of everything your organization has learned. So if your organization has been around for 100 years, you should have some amazing automation tools. That's if you've captured the knowledge and learning into the actual tooling and not SharePoint. Okay, there's a difference. And so how does this work? So it generates this command called bootstrap. If I were to run it, I get this little HTTP server starting the momentum calculator, the same app. All I'm doing is taking HTTP requests, and then I turn the input into data that the same Fortran program was working on before. And so if I were to call this program, everyone just uses curl. So I'm going to curl this local thing on the invoke function, and I'm just going to give it the same input file. And hopefully it works. This is a live demo. So I'm going to delete the output file to make sure it works. And so the server is running, and we call this curl command. We send it to the HTTP server, and it's invoking the exact same Fortran function before. I can reuse it all. There's nothing legacy about that code. It was just written a long time ago. But the fundamentals are roughly the same. And I can take the way that thing works and turn it into something a bit more modern with just a little bit of wrapper. And so now at this point with this tool in hand, I have a bit of agility. I can take the existing tools and move them forward. And if this works, I should be able to output this CSV file. So it works. Didn't take very long. And during the stand-up, I can be like, I am done. And so with all of this empathy throughout my career, when I got to Google, one of the top destinations that I've been working towards my whole career, a few promotions later, I became a distinguished engineer. And one of my core tenets was bringing this idea of empathetic engineering. Working with real people who have real problems, I noticed one thing. We hired a lot of smart people. Algorithms, no problem. Building the next generations of tooling, no problem. But we lacked a lot of empathy. And the way I demonstrated that empathy and lack of empathy is I asked them to do very simple things that our customers would do. You can think of it like a hackathon, but that wasn't the goal. The goal is I wanted them to feel the problems of our customers to the point where they gain their own empathy. And what that involved with them getting into a room during the engineering offsites, I would come in and they could see me coming. And I would give them like a hello world style example of something that our customer would try to do. They would break up into teams about as big as you all sitting at this table. And then I would ask them, you have an hour to complete this simple task. And they couldn't do it. And I asked them to present what made it hard. Turns out, there are people who build cars and have no driver's license. They know where the engine goes, they know what the transmission should be, but they've never driven the car. They don't know how it feels. And so you make them feel it. I remember one of the engineers came up, he was like, this is pretty ridiculous. We've been working on this thing for years, and it took all of these steps to make them write down every step, every Google search, every piece of documentation. And I asked them, what would you do to fix it? And then the idea becomes theirs, right? There's this saying, there are some people who have ideas, and there are some ideas that have people. And that was the best way I found to give them this empathy so they can come up with the ideas. And then we would go on to ship many products that had empathy baked in. And someone said, well, how do you measure this? There's a PM in here somewhere. It's like, but how do you measure it? How do you know if it's working? And we can come up with all kind of dashboards to prove that empathetic engineering is a thing and is effective. But there's only one metric that I care about. And I'm going to show it to you because we shipped the feature, and it was pretty significant. It took about 1.5 years to do it. And I remember walking through Google's office, and Mike Denise, one of the engineers in the sessions, and he came up to me and said, hey, you remember that old empathy session that happened about 1.5 years ago? He ended up building what they call workload identity. It became an industry standard of how Kubernetes interacts with identity management in the cloud. And he ran up to me and he said, hey, Kelsey, let me show you. I finally got it. And I know it's ready because he approached it from an empathetic place. He was the customer for 1.5 years. He made sure all the docs, all the keystrokes, the command line tools, he did it from a place of empathy. He knew what done was. It wasn't technically done. It was done for the actual user. And so I made that tweet. And then Mike Denise says, solutions are made of products, are made of features, are made of configuration. None of these can stand out without a good problem. If you set out to help others, start by building empathy, and good problems fall out. And he has been personally changed forever. He approaches the problems with empathy. That's the way I measure it. Maybe it doesn't scale, but it's very human-centric. And when those people show up to the stand-up, it's very different motivation. It's a very different feedback loop you get when it comes from a place of empathy. Now, I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and to help me ask and answer them, I'm going to be joined by TC on the stage for a quick fireside chat, but that's it for this part of the presentation. Thank you. You got chairs, okay?
Cool.
All right, we're going to sit them on the stage. 2 talks in one. We should have a little time for some Q&A from the audience, because that, to me, tends to be the best part. So if we have a few minutes, we'll figure out how to let you all ask some questions if that works for you. TC, welcome.
Welcome to Detroit.
Awesome, I've been here before.
I hope we've been very welcoming.
I have. Fantastic.
Well, when I was asked to do this, I wasn't sure what to ask you. So I talked with Nayan, and I said, Nayan, hey, can you go out to that Chat GPT thing and say, what would you ask Kelsey Hightower? And he did. It came back with just oodle. It's very chatty, right? And so actually, I'm not going to use these.
Okay.
But it was funny. It inspired me to ask a few questions. Cool? So
okay.
How about if we start with these and see where it goes?
Let's do it.
Good? Okay, the first question. Oh, that's loud. First question. How does empathy build trust?
How does empathy build trust? There's a very human thing happens when you know that someone is putting their best effort. You can see it. So the way they talk, the way they take it seriously, they give you an update, not in a passive-aggressive way, but they take it personal. And my very first experience with this idea that we should be taking this a bit more personal than we do, that company that I was working at, where you could wear jeans on Friday, we had our first outage that I was a part of, and we go into this room, and it feels like there's assigned seats. Like, people go to this war room so often, they know where to sit. And this is a payments processor, and they were processing credit cards and also EBT cards. So for people that are on food assistance, they get these special cards to give them dignity. They look like the credit card you have in your wallet. And we had an outage, and things are red on this board. And he didn't trust us, the CTO, because we do this so often, and it's like a ritual, and people just go through the motions every time. No sense of urgency, and he felt we lacked empathy. So he explained to us in that session that there's a person shopping with their family with a grocery cart full of groceries. They're in the checkout line, and that EBT card is being declined. That's what all of those little dots are on the big screen behind us. And every time they swipe, it's declined. And unlike our other customers, they do not have another form of payment. And so they got to leave all of those groceries. I don't know if you've ever been in a grocery store and you've forgotten your wallet. It is an extremely embarrassing feeling. But in this case, they have their wallet. It's just that this form of payment ain't going to work. And while we're sitting in this room, taking our sweet time, doing this like clockwork, with a lack of empathy, we didn't seem to care. And so he explained that to me, and I said, wow, we got to start taking this stuff super seriously. Meaning we need to understand that there are real people who depend on the work that we do. We're not just system administrators or whatever our HR given title is, and it's so important. And then when you take on that mindset, people can see it. People can feel it. You know when you're working with someone like that. And those people I tend to trust a bit more with the problem that I'm giving them, because I know that their approach is going to be rooted more in just some timeline that we arbitrarily agreed to, that they're taking this thing personal, and I know I'm getting their best effort. And so that's where I think the link between empathy and trust lies.
Thank you very much. So it triggers in me a thought, and I'm listening about how important this ability for leaders and others in the organization to tell a story, because they connect when they do that. And all the status report thing is supposed to be a story, but it's like this it's an abstraction from the real humanity of it, is what I'm hearing you say. Is that accurate?
100%. And I think, unfortunately, you can get really far in the tech industry with none of this. Everything that I'm talking about isn't necessarily required. It doesn't come up in interview processes very much. Most people that can write software really well can go really far without ever being good at human interaction. And then we decorate a lot of people above them to keep them from ever having to do it. And so our industry, in some ways, almost just rewards the get it done attitude versus getting it done with empathy.
Well, there are a lot of folks who became engineers because that's what they love to do, and then they spend time doing status reports and all the things that are like a sidetrack to them. So for people that are on a team, working hard every day, close to the metal, trying to make decisions, how is it that they can develop the confidence to make, like an engineer making a dozen decisions a day, how do they develop the confidence that they're making the right decision? How do they tie that back to all the things that people are going to be asking them about in a status report, right? There's an abstraction. The leaders are completely abstracted from those decisions, right? The little ones all day, every day. How do you connect that?
In my real world experience, one thing I found is that people don't have enough time to think. And if you've ever been under pressure, I remember early in my career when I didn't have a lot of money, I can only think about 5 minutes ahead of time. That's it, I gotta get to this place on time. I gotta do the job that's in front of me. There wasn't a lot of planning, wasn't a lot of strategy, and there wasn't a lot of room to zoom out. And if you think about it, the workplace is designed in very similar ways. I remember being the VP of engineering, I would observe the team, and I don't really care what time people come in. You come in when you come in, life happens. But the standard flow was around 10 o'clock, engineering comes in with this cup of coffee in the hand. That means from like 9:30 to 10, there was this Starbucks situation going on. And they get in at 10, and there's a meeting at 10. We got to groom the backlog or do something. So from 10 to 11, they can't really engage thoughtfully in the work. Now, when you go back to your desk, you got to be careful because lunch is at noon. So if you get too deep, you're going to get disrupted by lunch. And then people are planning lunch, where you want to eat, where do you want to go. Now it's 1:30. Now you're back in your chair. But you got to be careful because there's a meeting at 2, right? And around 2 o'clock, you would have to go do some other meeting about some requirements maybe. So now it's 3:30. You got to be careful because you need to leave by 4 to beat traffic. So where do you do your work? You do it at home.
Home, yeah.
That's what most people are doing. They're doing their work at home. And so one thing I decided to do, and I tried it as an experiment, because I wanted actual agility. I wanted the team to feel like they can come in and execute, but that required a bit of continuity. It required some consistency. So I walked around the organization, I gained consensus. I said, I have a thought. What if people could work at work? And everyone was like, what? I was like, here's my idea. What if there were no meetings between 10 and 2 every day? They're like, I don't know, man. People might actually get something done. And so that's what happened. Eng, product, sales, support, anything before 10 is fair game. Anything after 2 is fair game. And what we noticed is that people came in and they could sit down at 10 and not check the calendar because there should be nothing there unless you're collaborating with your team on something you're actually working on. And they could actually work till 2 o'clock uninterrupted. Of course, you can do your lunch. But imagine having a 4 or 5 hour block where you know you can engage deeply with the work. And that gives an opportunity, empathy. You can think about, how would someone use this? You actually have time to ask them. There's this thing where you can actually ask the customer. You can have a relationship with the customer and say, hey, there's a thing I'm working on. Before I finish it, I would like to know if you can jump on a meeting and I can show it to you and you can give me feedback. And they had more time to do things like that. And so I think giving people that time boundary, that constant ability to actually work at work, it created a different set of habits. They knew that they can engage deeply with the work. And look, I've been writing software for a long time. We do not sit in our chairs and write code for 4 or 5 hours straight. That's not what happens, right? We figure out what to do, we try a few things, we have to step back, and we ask ourselves, is this the right approach? If there's any bugs, and then we fix them. But now in this equation, we can bring more humans in the loop, and once we get that feedback, we can go right back to the keyboard and continue working. So that was the thing that I did.
That's amazing. So this protected time that you guys were able to produce, did you get buy-in throughout the rest of the organization? Has it become pervasive? How did you sell?
Well, that was many companies ago, but the way I knew it was working, we had once every 2 months or so, we had these kind of company get-togethers. That's where they buy you pizza and Hawaiian punch. And they put it all on one floor, and it encourages people to come to the same floor and be like, free pizza. I don't know why that still works. And the support team was like, Kelsey, I have no idea what you all are doing up there, but whatever it is working. Support tickets are down. We are no longer surprised by what's coming. You all are writing release notes and pre-docs, and you're asking us to come sit side by side. So you go down to support and you say, support, I think I fixed it, but before I say I fixed it, you want to just sit by me and I can show it to you? And support is like, yo, they're going to call about that. If you leave that flag like that, we're going to get calls all day. It's like, oh, I didn't know that was a problem. And they fix it. And so when this director of support said, whatever you're doing, just keep doing that.
Yeah.
And that was a good feedback to me
There's no
that this was helpful.
success like success, right?
Success, real success.
Yeah.
Not the ones that you see on the chart, but the one you get from validation from the people you work with.
Thank you. I'm seeing Jason, which means we might be running out of time. So I wanted to get one more question that was inspired by ChatGPT, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so how does empathy foster diversity and inclusion?
That's a deep one.
Yeah?
My whole life, I never really thought about it, even though I should have. It's right in front of me every day. And I was on this flight back from a large conference, and I had my Google Cloud backpack, and I slid it under the first class seat in front of me. And the person sitting next to me looks at my backpack, and he says, what do you do? Assuming I probably work for Google, and this cloud-like logo was a hint. And I told him what I did, and he said, and I asked him what he did. And he says, I work with world leaders, CEOs of large tech companies, and people who run governments to tell them why this is so important. And look, there should just be common sense of why it's good just to treat fellow humans good. That shouldn't take a whole lot of thinking to understand why. It shouldn't. And so for him, he explained for them where their alignment was. These people run businesses, and it has to make business sense to them. And so he asked me to look around the airplane. He's like, look at this. We're flying in this thing with high-speed internet, plated food, all in the air. And the safety record of airlines is pretty great. They land constantly. Most people don't even think about the landing anymore. And he asked me to realize that the aviation industry is less diverse than the tech industry. And that the airplane we're flying in, as modern as it feels, it was only built by a subset of humanity. Imagine if you were able to take global intelligence from every corner of the earth and had them working on aviation for the last 100 years. What would aviation be? And you get the best results when you allow the very best to participate. That's it. It's just common sense. The sports industry has figured this out a long time ago. You just get the best talent in the world, no matter where it comes from. And if you do that correctly, you might just find yourself winning a championship. And I think other industries have to realize that the best talent comes from everywhere. The only thing missing is this opportunity component. And when you give people that opportunity, you don't want to just hire these robots. You look at the HR job profile, it says, we don't want humans, we want robots that have 50 years of IBM experience, 39,000 years of Java experience, and the ability to stand in stand-ups every day and report status. That's where we're hiring. You don't want that person over and over again. You actually want unique people with different ideas to be a part of your team, and one day you might just get lucky that one of these unique people may give you a unique idea that you can turn into something useful. That is the connection between this empathetic thing that we're talking about and the work that we do. It should be done for the very best because we're trying to serve everyone in the world, not just a subset of it. So why not invite the whole world to participate?
Thank you. I'm not sure if we have time for one more. I've got one more real quick.
Okay.
Time. Are there techniques for practicing and building our empathy muscles?
I mean, look, I think there's a lot of real world things you can do. For me, it has always been, if I join a new team, I want to go to lunch with the PM. I need to understand how they work, how they think, what their aspirations are, and how I can help. And I repeat the same process with our customers. Nothing to me is better than going to the customer and watching them work. That company where I gave that 10 to 2 no meeting clause, we were building this software to help small businesses place and price their inventory on places like Amazon and eBay and all of these marketplaces. And the way that they do it, and a lot of them are selling used books. They would scan their inventory into the system. And we built this software, and you would scan, and you would look at the screen to see if you did it right. You would scan and look at the screen. And we were like, our software is great. Everyone uses it. Look at all these customers. And then we all took a field trip to the customer. And we said, hey, can we watch you work? And the person was like, look, I have this pallet of books. I have to decide which ones are like can't be resold, what condition they're in, and so I scan them, and then I have to key in this thing. And he was like, I was like, what's the longest part of it? It's like this piece where they have to actually look over and look at 3 or 4 different fields and sometimes scroll up to see the field that's below the fold. Now, one of the engineers was like, oh, we could just move the field above the fold, problem solved. I was like, you ain't listening. You aren't watching. I was like, before we start throwing out solutions, let's just ask. And he said, you know what would be cool? If you just added a little beep, if it was good. Meaning if the price was high enough to be sold in those marketplaces and all of these customers checked out, if you could just beep, I would never have to turn my head. And we're like, a beep? That's it? Like, yeah, just beep. And he made this sound. And we went back to the office, and he was like, dude, make it beep. And they did, and we had the setup in the office for the first time. We had never used the product. So we brought it in the middle, and it's like, all right, we did this tech demo, and we said, scan book, and it beeps. And everyone's like, okay, it beeps, now what? I was like, aha, wait till we ship it. And we shipped it, the customers was like, oh, whoever put in the beep, you should be promoted. God loves you. And so then that became the feature. And the beep was so satisfactory to our customers, and someone could tell that we were listening.
So I'm hearing you say, reach out, connect with people, be curious. All of that is going to be magical, or at least that's what I heard when you were talking.
Don't be afraid to be a human being.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelsey.